This is going to be a good one on the Honest Nothing podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, work with different outlets, also call volleyball for ESPN. Dan Margulis with ESPN is my guest today on the Conversation platform, where we bring on folks in sports media and we talk beyond what they do work-wise, even about their personal lives, their family lives, to get the whole picture of the person. And after finishing this conversation with Dan, we definitely were able to do that. Some humor, levity, insights into what he's like as a father, and as to what he's doing work-wise at ESPN as one of their key players, Senior Director Programming and Acquisitions at ESPN, a guy who loves to give back as well, has a great team there, and we're going to really have some fun with our one-on-one. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe. Here is my chat with Dan. He is what we call the pride of Amherst College. Dan Margulis with ESPN now, Senior Director, Programming and Acquisitions at ESPN. A very busy man working with a lot of different properties, and we're going to tell his story from a work perspective, but also from a personal perspective. He's a dad of two. He's got a son at Clemson. We're going to learn about his story in a way in which some that even are really close friends with him are going to learn something new about him. No pressure here.
Oh,
Dan.
great.
He's like, what did I get myself into? I'm Bryan Fenley, and work with a bunch of different outlets called volleyball for ESPN and other things as well for other networks. And Dan, I know I've had a lot of your colleagues on, your closest colleagues, to share their stories. So I appreciate the opportunity to learn more about you in a way that's going to learn about all dimensions of Dan Margulis.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Why is it so hard for you to sit still?
I don't know. It's not ADHD, I don't think, but I just I think throughout my career, the times when I've been in positions that were the slowest in terms of, not necessarily responsibility, sometimes they're big, but I function better when there's more madness going on. I think I slow down a little bit inside when it's faster outside. So um it just to me it's more fun building than maintaining, right? When you're able to sort of, pull things together, create new things, try different ideas. That makes this maintaining is fine, but that makes it a lot more fun.
How good are you at compartmentalizing?
Um Pretty good. I think that's something I've had to do over the years. I think as I've gotten older too, it's about knowing where you're weak, right? So um one of my favorite stories when I was on ESPN, and Rosalind Durant, who was with ESPN, is now with Disney, and I did a personality test, right? And the Myers-Briggs thing. And
Yeah.
we were literally the exact opposite on every category, right? So I was all like this, she's like enlist. And it was actually interesting because we started dealing with each other. We were dealing with each other well before, but then we still joke about it. But one of the things it showed me is that I need to make sure I surround myself with people who offset that, right? So when I've been at my best, I've had people working with me who are good at lists, right? So I can say, we got to do this, this, and this. I'm good at keeping it in my head, but not always putting it down. And then just making sure that gets done. And that helps with compartmentalizing, because you sort of figure out, I have it all up here. I just don't always, she's also the one who pointed out I was doing a presentation once, and I was doing it, and at the end of it, she goes, "Did you realize you skipped an entire part?" Like in my head, I went further. I'd forgotten to talk about other stuff. So it's like slowing down a little bit. But you have to, in our business, you have to, right? You have to be able to sort of, I've got this person mad at me in volleyball right now. And by the way, we've got to finish our lacrosse schedule. And by that, you're always working, you're maintaining the present sports that you handle, and then planning the sports that you also handle that haven't begun yet. So your season's ahead and also the season at the same time. So figuring out that's a balance of how to maintain that. And whether it's you doing it or having people who work with you who are really good at it, I think that's really important.
So what does your desk look like then?
It's a mess. I'm not. Yeah, it's comical. It's just, I'm not a guy that, I think it's interesting with COVID now, everything is much more digital. So it's all on my computer. So you can't see it as much, but I try to be good about having my folders aligned and everything like that. But that's definitely not my strength, but I'm pretty good at, um, making sure that it's still going on and going forward in my own method and my own madness. And the challenge always there is I know what works for me. How do I make it work for others? And that's something I'm until I'm 75 years old, I'll still probably be trying to get better at.
There's a lot that you're good at already. When you think about your strengths, what comes to mind with the team you get to work with?
Um, I think at this point, there's a lot of experience. I've done this a long time. And I think that helps because I've been part of a lot of launches, and launches are creative, right? And I think one of my strengths people would say is probably I'm pretty creative and have a pretty good scheduling sense. I watch a lot of TV, bad TV that has nothing to do with sports. And I think that gives you a sense of what people watch. People make fun of me, but I do think it's important. Like if you're going to program for people, sometimes the tendency and like, a really good producer is producing some really good producers are producing what they think is good TV, but it's not necessarily what the viewer wants because sometimes they don't want it that same way, right? So if you're saying like these are trends right now, I know it seems silly, but that's what people want. How do you bring that in? And I think it's the same thing with programming and just I've always been pretty creative at doing this stuff, and just building things, and I think that's fun. And at the same time, I've also been able to negotiate a lot of deals, and that involves again being structured, being organized, but also just being able to deal with people. And I learned from a lot. I've worked for a lot of people, right? So I've learned different styles, everything from not saying a whole lot to saying a whole lot, and where that works and where it doesn't. And then perfecting my own style, which hopefully like Michael Feinberger works with me. He's watching that and say, yeah, that doesn't work. I would do it this way, like just I did with other people that I worked with. Um, and I think I'm also at that point in my career too, where it's like helping other people succeed, like sort of working for me as I go into boot camp at this point, because we work on so much stuff and it gives you a varied experience of just like the ultimate in grunt work, but also um, some lower acquisitions and things like that. So you pick up all those skills. And if you're working on the NFL later, it's the same stuff. It's just you've actually done it more because the NFL at that level is being dealt at the highest level of the company.
So from working when it comes to programming NFL to like you said, other properties that might not be as big and as massive, but when you're watching television, what is it about the content that will keep you watching, that you find needs to be seen on screen for you to not change the channel?
Yeah, I think in our world, and one of the reasons why I've sort of started and come back to the college world, college and high school world, is to me that's the ultimate, right? It's environment. Like you have to have a packed gym, and you can get in these like a gymnastics event from Alabama is insane, or Utah if you've ever seen that. And then when you're just sort of watching, if you see that environment in anything, you're going to stop and see what this is. If it's an empty place, an empty building, why should I watch this? Even if it's the highest level of any sport, basketball, you name it. Um, and I think that enthusiasm and that level of play, I think that stops, and then obviously it gets into storytelling, which is ESPN strength too. Why am I watching? So why am I watching this volleyball? There's all these people. It's crazy. I've never seen it. Why is that person wearing a different colored jersey, and what does she do? Like, and I think that's part of the stuff that did, and just have fun. Like, I think sometimes it's not, I mean, you can go too far, but I think if you're having fun and when you're watching it, you can have fun too and try different things and know what's current, whether it's music or graphics or whatever, just try to do different experiment. And I'm lucky I work on sports where you can really do that. I'm working really closely with the different production people that work on our sports on trying to develop things. And, they come to us and say, well, what about this? All right, well, why not? So we can't always do that with the bigger sports, but we can with the smaller sports.
What do you like when it comes to collaboration with those different productions and the way in which you all are able to work together and hear one side's needs and then being able to fulfill those and sort of going back and forth and having that symbiotic relationship?
Yeah, I mean, the sports we've been most successful in, I think we have that, whether it's the Erica Galbraith and who I've been working with a lot with lacrosse and volleyball, and Sean Murphy, who I work with a lot on the ESPN Plus, Kate Jackson, Megan Aronowitz, whether it's gymnastics or softball, where we all work really closely. Phil Orleans with baseball, we all work really closely together, and they're all different people, right? So it's in different sports. So I think one of the advantages of college is that you do get to work with them. And, look, I'm programming, I'm the business guy, right? So I'm doing the deal and I'm scheduling, and their production, they need, they're putting it on the air. They have various needs, whether it be financial or otherwise. So we start at that, but then there's, how can we make this volleyball championship different? Oh, let's do a whip around show. We've never done that before. And here's why, because if we do 1 versus 16, it's a blowout. This way we're going back in and out, things that have done in other sports, but we haven't done there. And you're able to, because we handle the regular season and the postseason, sort of doing that. Oops, that was my watch for some reason.
Oh, you're good.
So, I think we work together a lot. When we're at our best, we do that. When we're not, is when we're not communicating, when I haven't done a good job of explaining what's going on and there's confusion, because, John Wadhack years ago, who was my original mentor when I started, used to talk about programming being sort of the hub of the wheel, because a lot of people, when they hear programming, they think it's, computers, right? Like, I'm working programming. Ironically, I didn't even know what program it was, but I interned when I was in college at CBS for Geraldo, Now It Can Be Told, and the Joan Rivers Show, right? Which had nothing to do with doing commercial stuff. But one of my friends was working in programming for the Olympics. When CBS had them, and so I sort of learned that, wait a second, that's the cool stuff with production, but you also get to do the business stuff. That's neat. So, you can see, I told you I digress a lot, but John talked about programming being the hub of the wheel, that every decision you make affects every area of the company. So if you are going to acquire something, you have to have finance for the budget, you have to have production to produce it, you have to communicate with communications to get the word out, marketing, sales, etc. You can see how it goes down the line, that you're sort of in the middle. I think as the business is growing, obviously it's a little bit more complicated when you say that, but there is always that central point. If you're not communicating, it's going to go downhill fast. And there have been things that I have not done well at, so hopefully I do a better job now. But that's what makes it fun too, because you really do combine all aspects of the business when you work in the programming department.
You're doing a great job. You're just being humble. You're human as well. Dan Margulis is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. Have done volleyball for ESPN. So, Dan, you brought up one of your mentors and a couple of them. Another mentor, Tombo Jackson.
Yeah.
What does that man mean to you?
So I went to Amherst College 4 years and then got my master's at UMass in sport management. And in those days, there were 2 programs, really. That's how old I am, right? I mean, there were other ones, but you went to UMass or you went to Ohio U. And UMass, neither one was really a media hotbed. They were more college sports, AD jobs, professional sports, that kind of stuff. So I had the opportunity to intern at ESPN in that department, and they hadn't really had an intern before. They were just starting, we were still a 1-floor building. And it was right about when we were going to launch ESPN2. So I interviewed with among other people, Tom Jackson, and he really took me under his wing. And he's a legend, and he was sort of director of college sports. He created Championship Week. He was great because we would create projects. So we launched ESPN2. I got hired. I was working with him. I sort of, we didn't have this new PC job. I was one of the first ones to do it, right? So I worked with him and Dave Brown and Mike Oresco on college sports, Lauren Matthews. Then I'd work with Ron Semio on ESPN2, and all these other. And he was always sort of like the mentor who would keep me balanced. And we all have a million OJ stories because he's unique. But that was really Tom at his height of ESPN powers, right? So he just is somebody that kept in contact with everybody, kept all of his newspapers, just was really good at follow through. So I watched that a lot, and I saw what was great about it, which was 95%, and then where it held him back 5%, right? Because he was spending so much time that he wasn't going home, because he was literally responding to everybody's, not emails back then, but like correspondence. But yeah, he's pretty special, and then we always check in, and then he was at the American Conference, Big East then American Conference, and we worked together until he just recently retired. He's still texting. He was finding old pictures and sending them to me to haunt me and use them as evidence. But he was fun. He just had he balanced. He did what I love to do. He balanced passion with creativity and a good business sense. And I think I'll always be trying to do that. I'll never match up to what he did, but that was always something that anyone who really knew him saw that.
I saw you really poured out your heart into what he has meant to you when he retired, in that note on Facebook, and reading through that, the effect that he has on your life to this day, even all those years later, how would you quantify that?
It's again, I've had a lot of good mentors and some mentors that were bad that were good mentors because you learn what not mentors,
Sure.
the super whatever. You learn from all of them, and I was very lucky that my first one was a great one, right? Because if you have a bad one at first, it sets bad habits, and then who knows what happens. But my first one, whether it was Tom, whether it was John Wildhack, Ron Samuel, all those guys had different qualities, and we were all thrown in. And really back then at ESPN, you were doing it. Everyone was doing everything. So you got a lot more experience, and you got to be in different kinds of meetings and settings and see what they did. But if he hadn't, you know, said, "Hey, try this college rivalry series," right? Like it was one of the first things that he let me handle on ESPN too. So I always remember that when I'm dealing with other people, right? So we did Alabama, Georgia women's gymnastics. We did Stanford, Cal water polo. We did DePaul Wabash football.
Yeah.
We did Amherst Williams football, which almost got me fired because first of all, I was at Williams, which was my first mistake. Um, and then we got up there and the field was just mangled. It had been a rainstorm. And it was Bob Carpenter and Beano Cook did the broadcast, and Beano shows up in a raccoon fur coat. And it ended up being a 0-0 tie because they tried field goals. They couldn't kick anything.
Oh my
And
gosh.
Rubino Cook going there saying, because, George Steinbrenner had donated a lot of money to Williams. And he's like, well, you think George Steinbrenner could build a decent field for God's sakes? So I got back in Wild Hacks like, why shouldn't I fire you? I'm like, oh, because it was a good rivalry. But it was fun. I mean, he was joking. But as opposed to DePaul Wabash, where they returned the opening touch the opening kick was returned for a touchdown. Then they kicked off and they returned it for a touchdown. So it was fun. But he let me. He was having fun with me on doing this stuff, and I learned how to contact the schools, how to follow through. We did Alcorn State games when Steve McNair was there, and you're doing these remote, really tough to produce locations, and that was the first time I learned about HBCU sports and the band because the tuba guy was in the way. It was amazing. It was awesome, but he would let me do it and he would be there. And, I learned a lot from that.
Your son goes to Clemson, and you talk about a football team, and if you put them up against the game that you mentioned was 0-0, I got a feeling that Clemson would have put up just a few points in that game if that were able to happen. But for you, you were talking about the qualities in the way in which you operate work-wise. What qualities does it take to be able to raise two teenage boys?
Don't ask me. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot, there's things we haven't done right, but I'm from Boston, so I've created two Boston sport fans, even though they've been basically grown up in Charlotte, so that's been kind of amusing. But no, I think it's there've been interesting cycles, right? So we've traveled a lot, and I've traveled a lot, so that was always difficult, and I always tried to make it back, even if I had to take a red eye for big events, sporting events, things like that. They're big into that. I think COVID changed the paradigm a little bit because my oldest at the time was a sophomore in high school, and then we're at home basically for 2.5 years. So I was more there than I was for good or for bad, but I think they keep me humble, they keep me active, but they also they have good ideas, and they're always why does ESPN do this? And you got to watch this, but there's a lot of you got to watch this YouTuber. You got so I've learned, I watch what they're watching, right? And they're it's a challenge, right? Because they're not watching games. They watch the NBA because that skews younger because they're playing
Yeah,
NBA 2K. I've become a big lover of soccer, which I never was, partly because they played it, but also they're playing FIFA, and suddenly like they know, and it becomes a whole game that we're trying to keep up with that. So, but I think raising kids in this day and age, you have to pay attention to what they're, again, I'm doing from different, you should pay attention to what they're watching for obvious reasons, but also in terms of providing content, right? They consume it way
yeah,
differently. Like, yeah, when I'm talking to the conferences or whatever, I talk about, menus like you and I remember waiting on the menu and like, God damn it, I just missed it. I got to wait for another 30 seconds for the thing to come around to find
for
out what's
sure.
on. They have no clue what that is. They come on, they want it. They know ESPN2, but it's whatever. They wouldn't necessarily know what it is because they're pulling it up differently. And so I think it's good to see that and good to see follow that and not reject it because that's whatever all the kids their age are doing.
Yeah.
So I've learned a lot from them. But yeah, no, it's been fun. It's I love them. They're great. They're opposites, which I guess happens. You raise them the same way. But they're a lot of fun, and as they get older, they get along a little better, which is kind of fun to watch as the older ones in college. But it's been a blast.
How have they gotten along with you as they've gotten older? Are they at a stage now where they're less
Am I on a couch
rebellious?
right now? Uh, I mean, they're wise asses, and then I'm kind of a wise, so I think some of that is inherited. Um, I think mostly good. Look, I think any parent would tell you staying at home for 2 years with kids changes things, right?
Yeah,
It's not your, you want to be their friend, but you got to be their parent, and
sure.
that it creates, where the line is. And my relationship with my dad I was very close with my dad, but it was a lot different. He was an OBGYN who was all in private practice, who was hardly ever around and knew nothing about sports. And all I wanted to do was sports. So it worked well because of that, right? Because we were opposite. These guys have more of my same interests, and they'll make fun of me because I'm going to a volleyball match and they want to go to the football game, like that kind of stuff. But I explain, you know, but they enjoy it. I mean, obviously I work in sports, you get to go to games with your dad. I think if anything, like, oh, what, we're not in a suite? Like, come on, guys. Really? So I think they've become accustomed to that kind of thing, or decent tickets, or just even being able to go to events. Right. But we do, like, we around Christmas time we went to Boston, just me and the boys, and went to a Bruins game. Next night went to the Celtics game, and then the next day went to the Patriots Bengals game. And if you remember that was the one that was ridiculously cold. And here I got these two, Southern kids, and they've never been that cold in their life, and we had the best time. Like, it was a lot of fun to be able to do that kind of thing. And if I didn't work in this business, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it. So
That is, well, first of all, how many layers were you wearing at that game? Because it was freezing.
a lot, a
Yeah.
lot, and probably not enough. And I had gone to the store before, and we were getting certain things. And I was like, I asked my youngest, Corey, like, we should get these wool socks. He's like, I don't need socks. And of course, in the middle of the game, we had a bottle of water. We put it in front of us, and it was frozen in about 15
Oh my
minutes.
gosh.
But we were, it caused you to jump around. And in the game, the Patriots were awful in the first half. And they came back in the second half and were about to win, and then they fumbled it. So the whole place was just rocking. And they got to get their first real glimpse of mass holes, and in a good way, the lovable ones, not the ones that, and so that was kind of fun. Because they've grown up really down here. But and the hockey, the Bruins are playing, yeah, so they don't watch hockey down here, and that was kind of cool to see it in person, and they got to see a good game, so that was fun.
What a treat for them. Dan Margulis is with me, Senior Director of Programming and Acquisitions at ESPN. I'm Bryan Fenley. I've done volleyball for ESPN. Dan, I want to leave you with this last question. And you were talking about how here you are working in sports. Your father did not go that direction. So then how did you two bond when you were young, when you had this love of sports growing up, say, and he's working, he's away from home all the time?
I mean, I was the youngest of four, right? And there's a pretty large age difference. So my sister's 10 years, it's 10, 8, 5 than me. And I think by that point in his life, he was at a different point in his life, right, where he could be around a little bit more. Um, he's also the smartest person I've ever met, which was always intimidating. Like when you played Trivial Pursuit with him, it was annoying. Yeah. He's very smug about it. But I don't know. I think that he was at a point in his life where we were able to just sort of bond by going, events or going to movies or listening to NPR, which he used to listen to, which in classical music, all things that I hated. And then of course, when he passed away, I play classical music on Sunday morning, much to my kids' chagrin. Like, you just sort of absorb certain.
Yeah.
But I don't know. We just, we went through some things, and we got close, and he was just, he was good about being there without being there, right? Like, just,
Yeah.
I always felt, you always want to feel safe with your parent, and my mom's great too. Please don't, but like, we just had a nice bond. So, it was fun. But yeah, I mean, I think probably because he didn't know anything I was doing, I mean, I remember when I told him, so I'm graduating at Amherst College, I'm telling him I'm getting my master's at UMass in sport management. He's like, "You're what? Like, is that legitimate? Like, is that really?"
Is that a job? Yeah.
My cousin at the time was a longtime SID at Boston University at Carpenter. and he called Ed, and Ed's like, yeah, no, this is like going to the Ivy League of sports management bachelor's program. I don't want to overblow it, but like that it was a legitimate thing and a path, and he was pretty good about it. But yeah, I think he had fun. Like one of my first great work memories was taking him. We went to an Outback Bowl summer event, like a summer sunsplash, and he golfed in the foursome with us. We won the foursome partly because my partners who were local Tampa people cheated, whatever. It was, and he just was, it was not his world. He was, he was in the Glee Club. He played the Glockenspiel. He was an academic. So he just sort of watched it from afar and got a kick out of it. And I think the differences were what probably brought us together a little bit.
I love that dynamic. And then you've been able to take what you've learned from your father and then share that. And you've got
it's a lot different era. The same things that work. You always had the respect, and I'm sure most parents, unless they're amazing parents, will say like, yeah, it's just different, right?
Here's what I love about you as we conclude this conversation: talent, humor, selflessness, and is willing to adapt. And having kids, like you said, that helps you with the way in which they see the world. They see what the audience wants, and that helps you with work. And so for us to go beyond work, it actually allows us to know more about what you're like when you're working, because we know that the influences go beyond that. And maybe, like you said, it felt like this was a therapy session for you. I know you said,
but God help us all.
But I love it. I love it. I enjoy these deep conversations. And thanks so much, Dan. Dan Margulis with me, of course, Senior Director of Programming and Acquisitions at ESPN. I'm Bryan Fenley, do sports for different outlets, have done volleyball for ESPN. Dan, thanks so much. This was fun, man.
Thanks, Bryan. Appreciate it.